I'm really passionate about teaching and mentoring. And I happened to have an undergraduate student come into my office one day, and this was probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and she had been abroad. And she came into my office to talk to me about, wow, there's these things called electronic cigarettes in Europe. And I'm really interested in these. And I had never heard of them to much extent. So we chatted about potential projects, and I'd like for the undergraduates to think critically about fundamental information they've already learned, the primary sciences, and how it could possibly apply to forensic science. So we're just having a conversation in my office about what these things are. And after she left my office, and for weeks, and if not months, I kept rolling this conversation over in my head. And slowly, and not that I pay much attention to what's in the media on television, you started here in the United States hearing about electronic cigarettes and them coming into the market. As a toxicologist, I thought, wow, these are just other devices for drug delivery. And I wonder if there's something around this. So I started pushing around to see if there was anything already in the literature about electronic cigarettes. There was really minimal information at the time. And I thought, well, this has got to be something that we've got to get ahead of this before it gets ahead of us, like so many other things in the forensic sciences, that we're usually very reactionary in forensic sciences in terms of finding information to put the story together. And so I thought, well, this could really be an interesting topic to pursue, where we might be at the front end of understanding it as it is emerging. So I wrote a proposal with some colleagues of mine, submitted it to the National Institute of Justice, and they funded it. So that's essentially how I began studying vaping. An electronic cigarette produces a vapor, and users just call it vaping. And so it's not like smoking a traditional cigarette, in which there's combustion in the cigarette and you're burning plant material. The electronic cigarette is heating up a water-based chemical that is stored within the electronic cigarette, and it creates an aerosol or a vapor. And so you'll hear users say it's a water cloud. And so the e-juices, or the e-liquids that's used to put into these electronic cigarettes, they typically contain something that's going to create the vapor, and it's going to contain some kind of flavorant. There's thousands of different varieties of flavors, from cupcake to blueberry, typical sweet, candy-oriented flavors to savory flavors. And so they're filled with a flavorant, and they're also filled with a drug, and that drug is typically nicotine, right? And so that's what's on the market. That's what's being marketed by Big Tobacco. So what's happening in the vaping community is that users who are looking for an alternative means for inhaling an illicit substance has looked towards the electronic cigarette, because the value for the electronic cigarette for them is that because you're not combusting the drug, because you're not burning the drug, you can't smell it. So if they want to vape THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, you have heard that, well, I know that somebody's smoking a joint in the hallway, right? Or I smelled the marijuana burning. When you vape THC, it does not have that classic smell. So the advantage for people who are vaping illicit substances is that they can actually vape their illicit substance, whether it's THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, or methamphetamine, or any of a host of other illicit substances. So this was what I was originally interested in pursuing, is, are electronic cigarettes that's used for vaping nicotine, are they being used, are they an effective way to actually inhale illicit substances? So because they're not association, there's no associated smell, no classic smell. People generally, in the general population, think that electronic cigarettes are a healthier alternative. And I'm not going to comment as to whether they are healthy or they aren't healthy. They potentially are a healthier alternative to traditional cigarettes. But generally speaking, the general public thinks that these are healthy. This is how they're being marketed. So, because people generally think they're healthy, because they're generally accepted, people are saying, wow, I can illicitly consume, I can vape my illicit substance in the public. You can vape methamphetamine sitting at work. You can vape THC or marijuana sitting in a ballpark. And so people are saying, it's just a water cloud. Well, that water cloud has a substance in it, has a drug in it. So this is why I decided to pursue this research, is that myself and my team are concerned about how electronic cigarettes are being pushed through drug forums, through YouTube blogs, and are generally accepted in the population to vape something that is considered illicit. There's really interesting history around the really rapid rise of electronic cigarette usage here in the United States. So a big tobacco company purchased a small producer of electronic cigarettes here in the United States. And they marketed it very rapidly because they wanted to take electronic cigarettes from side stream to mainstream. That the Centers for Disease Control just published a report in January 2016 that said that 2.4 million young people, middle schoolers and high schoolers, were using electronic cigarettes. And that 69% of the middle schoolers and high schoolers have seen marketing, aggressive marketing around electronic cigarettes. So, of course, the concern is that this population at this young age, in this, for whatever reasons they might become interested in illicit substances, are going to look towards electronic cigarettes. So, so this is part of my my interest, my passion, my goal. When we wrote the grant proposal 3 years ago, there was very little information about electronic cigarettes and nicotine. So when we wrote the grant, we said, well, we need to develop a baseline to understand electronic cigarettes and how they're used, and the concentration of the drug in the aerosol. So our baseline studies have been pretty successful. First of all, we had to figure out what these things were to begin with. What is an electronic cigarette and how does it actually work? And so part of that exploration was actually working through some of the lingo for users and the community, and what are their interests and their needs and their likes, and how do they modify these things, and then also set up some methodologies to actually help us trap the vapor. How do you then analyze a drug that's in a vapor form? What instruments do you use to analyze the drugs in the vapor? So we've actually been successful in developing our model to date. And we're showing some really interesting data on that. In the process of exploring all of this, when you push through drug blogs, when you push through YouTube videos, when you push through the electronic cigarette websites, and when we talk to users quite frequently, is that they said, oh, well, do you know that there's this e-liquid that has CBD in it, which is cannabidiol, which is a cannabinoid? Or do you know that there's an e-liquid across town that has kratom in it, which is a hallucinogen? So we started acquiring some of these drugs that we could acquire. A couple of agencies have actually sent e-liquids to us to analyze because they've gotten them, they've seized them. So we've actually have just gotten published a manuscript where we analyzed an e-liquid that was meant to put into an electronic cigarette that the company claimed had 69% THC in it, which is strong, to say the least. And, you know, when you receive these, you're like, is that true? Could that possibly be true? And so when we analyzed it, it actually had 47% THC in it, which is still a lot of THC. So our concern is that there's no real directions on how to use these. It's so, which is a little bit unlike the marijuana edibles, where they give a dosage on, all right, if you have a marijuana edible and it's got this much THC in it, then you only eat so much of it for a dose. So for these e-liquids that go into these e-cigs, there is no dosing information on this. So you've got 47% THC that's in an e-liquid, and somebody is going to vape that and pull 47% THC into their lungs. Now, how much is actually getting into their lungs? We don't know that yet, because we still need to do those kinds of studies. But conceivably, somebody vaping 47% THC, you know, there's a public health concern there potentially. So, you know, and I'm not even addressing how users moderate their usage based on what effects they're going to begin feeling as they're vaping, because much like smoking a traditional cigarette, vapors moderate how they use the electronic cigarette to moderate their experience. So a lot of things remain to be seen, but you know, we have taken a look at lots of e-liquids with all kinds of different drugs in there that vendors say claim that are actually in there, that either are or are not in there. And so some of the challenge around this is that right now the industry is not regulated. So without proper regulation, there's going to be poor quality control amongst these manufacturers who are producing these e-liquids. So there's levels of concern around this. So if my research can actually contribute to the data set, the data pool that helps people in federal agencies try to understand how they need to regulate these chemicals, these substances, these devices, then I think that's a major win for my granting agency, the NIJ. It's a major win for the forensic science community because we're beginning to understand what this issue is. So I think it's important work.